Hello, thank you for joining me. Today we are going to start talking about chapter 11. So we have skipped some chapters here. We went from chapters 1 through 3, and now we're going 11 through 14. Then we will head back to chapters 4 through 10. The reason for this is because we have an investment project that we are going to start up pretty soon, and I'll give you more details about that in a couple weeks. But I want to make sure that you know all about investing before we start that project. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the chapter that's on investing basics and evaluating bonds. Okay, so first we're going to start with just the basics. The first thing we need to do is establish our investment goals. So how much money do we need for our financial goals? We've got those short term, the intermediate, and long term goals. And you need to determine how much money do you need for those goals? And then how much risk are you willing to assume? So investing is all about risk. A lot of times the safer investments are the ones that do not yield as much interest or as much return. But the higher risk ones, you're hoping to get a bigger return, but there's also a risk that you'll lose more. So it's all about how much risk you're willing to take on. What situation could alter your goals? As we know in the last couple years here, there are so many different things that can change our goals. We have to be flexible and ready for all kinds of change. And it's the same with our financial goals. So if we're talking about the stock market, we don't know if it's going to go up or down. We don't know what our job is going to do in the future. There are lots of situations that can alter our goals, and we need to prepare for that. Also, it's very important to make sure our goals are reasonable. If we set unrealistic expectations for the interest that we're going to earn or the money we're going to set aside, then we're just going to set ourselves up for disappointment. So we need to have reasonable goals. And are you willing to make sacrifices to reach those goals? So we may need to cut some spending out in order to reach our financial goals. Maybe instead of eating out 5 days a week, you only eat out 2 days a week. Or maybe instead of having the most expensive phone that there is, you go and get a prepaid plan and use a cheaper phone. These kinds of things can result in big savings over time, and those are just some ways that we can make sacrifices to reach our goals. There are lots of things that we can do in performing a financial checkup. So here we are seeing, where do our finances stand? Are we doing what we need to do to reach our goals, and what can we change? So the first thing we want to look at is, are you paying your bills on time? There could be lots of reasons you're not paying your bills on time. Maybe you don't feel like you make enough money to pay those bills, or maybe you are paying for things that you want before you pay for the things you need. Of course, let's remember, we want to have groceries, we want to have a roof over our head. So it's important to pay our bills on time. And we definitely want heat and air also, right? This is South Carolina after all. Or maybe you're a procrastinator and you're not paying your bills on time because you're procrastinating. And that's important to get control of that, whether you set a timer or whether you pay a bill as soon as you get it, or whatever the situation is. It's important to pay our bills on time. There are lots of repercussions for not paying on time. You can have your items repossessed, whether it's a car or furniture or even your house foreclosed on. If you don't pay your bills on time, you don't get to keep those items. And businesses can sue to recover their cost. So they can try to get money that you owe them, or even if they repossess an item, they can charge you for items or for expenses they had for repossessing it, or maybe if they put that item to auction later. Those are costs that you may have to cover. Also, for not paying your bills on time, your credit score, I'm trying to combine two words there, your credit score can be lowered, and there are additional costs when it comes to credit when you have lower credit score, and you will get higher interest rates when it comes to borrowing money, and that is not a good thing. So we want to make sure we're paying our bills on time so we can keep our credit scores nice and high. So why not just file for bankruptcy? Lots of people file for bankruptcy. And, it just feels like you get wiped free and clear, right? Wrong. First of all, filing for bankruptcy is very expensive. You have to pay a lawyer. Anytime you get a lawyer involved, there's going to be some expenses that are not cheap. And also, it affects your ability to obtain credit for a home, car, or any kind of consumer purchases in the future. So, a bankruptcy does follow you for years and years. Please do not look at bankruptcy as an easy out. Let's use that as a very last resort. All right, we've already talked about budget some in this class. We know that it's important not to spend more than what you make. And I feel like this is very elementary. But then again, when it comes to spending, unfortunately, we have so many different ways that we can spend more than we make. There's so many ways to get credit. And we don't want that to happen. So it's important to make a budget to ensure that you are not spending more money than what you're bringing in. Also, if you do have consumer credit, it's a good idea to limit those payments to 20% of your after-tax income. So let's say you have some credit cards that you're trying to pay off. Try to get those paid off. Try to make payments of 20% or less of your after-tax income. And then once you get that paid off, it's a great idea to keep setting that money aside, but instead for something you can invest in, maybe for your retirement, maybe for one of your goals. But anytime that a payment goes away because you finish paying something off or because you no longer have the need for that item, keep putting that money aside for savings. Don't just shift it to spend on something else. That's a great way to start saving instead. All right, what about credit cards? Are credit cards something we should completely steer away from? In my opinion, no. Credit cards can earn you points, it can earn you cash back, it can earn you different rewards, but it's very important to pay attention to these 5 warnings when using credit cards. If you have an inability to pay that credit card completely in full each month, then you need to reassess whether or not you should have a credit card. If you do not pay that credit card in full every month, you will pay interest on it, and that will be you'll have much more of a loss in interest than you would in a gain from the rewards that the credit card company is giving you. So if you're not disciplined enough to pay that credit card off every month, then you need to step away from that and use cash or debit cards. Don't use a credit card to pay for lots of small purchases if you are struggling with paying it in full every month. When you use it to buy your coffee, to pump your gas, to buy your lunch, those little purchases, boy, trust me, they add up. And if you're having a hard time paying that credit card off in full each month, then this is a good thing to look at. We only use it for big purchases if you're struggling with that discipline. Do not use your credit card for a cash advance. This is where you go into the bank and you ask for an advance to get actual cash from that. So maybe you can go buy lottery tickets or pay your rent with it or whatever. Very bad idea to use a cash advance on your credit card because the annual percentage rate is usually higher than the rate on just the credit card itself. It's a good idea to limit your number of cards. The more cards you have, the harder it's going to be to keep track of everything that you owe, and the easier it is to swipe those cards at different places and spend, spend, spend. So I think it's a good idea to limit it to 1 or 2 credit cards. And if you are in trouble, get help. You can call the credit card company, ask them to lower your rate. You can ask them to consolidate. You can ask them to help in whatever way they can to bring those payments down and help you to get it paid off sooner. Do not just continue to struggle on your own. These companies are willing to help in some ways. All right. Now, I think we've talked some about a financial or about an emergency fund in here already, but the reason an emergency fund is so important because there's always going to be needs for immediate cash that go beyond what your paycheck is. Maybe there's a medical need. We had some of those in 2020 where my husband had a kidney stone and we went to the emergency room because we didn't know what was going on. And that cost us several $1,000s. We were thankful to have an emergency fund to pay for those. Maybe your car needs a new transmission. An emergency fund is important for that. Or maybe even the loss of a job, which a lot of people experienced in 2020. And there's always a possibility, a chance of you losing your job. So it's important to have an emergency fund. That's money set aside that you can quickly get your hands on when you need it. But you don't just dip in there because you want to go shopping or go out to eat. So we want to work to have at least 3 months worth of reasonable living expenses. Okay, so this is going to be able to pay all of your bills for 3 months is about the number you want to keep in an emergency fund. It doesn't have to be your income for 3 months. It needs to be all of your expenses for 3 months. All right, what are some ways to get that money you need to start an investment program? So first, pay your bills and then set some money aside for savings and then pay yourself. This is when you start setting aside extra for investing, or when you start using that discretionary money to do extra things you want to do, eating out, shopping, whatever it may be. You need to set aside money for savings first. Take advantage of any employer-sponsored retirement programs. So this would be like a 401k. If your employer is going to contribute any percentage to your 401k, then take advantage of that. Consider it a raise in your paycheck. It is so nice to set that money aside, especially at a young age. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Participate in an elective savings program. So when you get direct deposit, you can typically sign up to have a portion of your paycheck put directly into a savings account. So maybe $200 every paycheck you want to put into a savings account, or maybe it's 20 bucks, but it's a forced savings. So definitely consider that. So that way you don't even get your hands on it. So there's no chance of you spending that money without saving it before you mean to. This one's a fun one. It's make a special savings effort 1 or 2 months a year. So let's say every 6 months, we just make a special effort to spend less and put all the rest of it in savings. So maybe instead of going to the grocery store, you go into your pantry or your freezer and you pull out all of that food that you bought a long time ago and you have not been eating. How wasteful are we as Americans? We throw away so much food. So instead of doing that, go in there and try to eat stuff that you already have. If you're somebody who typically goes shopping and buys clothes or shoes, take that month off and save that money instead. Or if you're like me and you really like to eat out, we'll reduce that by a big number. And like I said, eat out of your pantry or your freezer instead and eat out less that month and take all of that extra money and save it towards an investment or a goal. And take advantage of gifts, inheritances, and windfalls. So this could be like a tax return, a tax refund, or big gifts, or an inheritance whenever someone passes away. Don't look at that as money that you can go spend and buy yourself a new wardrobe. Look at that as money that you can invest. Maybe you can retire sooner. Maybe you can pay off some debt. Take advantage of those big surprises, or maybe they were planned, but either way, take advantage of those to work for you and make your financial future better. All right, investing soon is a good idea because you have much bigger growth. So there's something called the time value of money. Basically, what that means is the sooner you invest, the more your money will grow. And the reason for that is compound interest. So if you invest money, let's say it was $100, and you earn 10% on that $100, after a year you have $110. If you then invest that $110 and then earn 10%, it's going to grow and your interest is going to earn interest. And then that interest will earn interest and that interest will earn interest. And that's what we call compound interest. It keeps earning interest on interest you earned. So the sooner you put that money in an investment, the more it will grow. And also, when it comes to investing, consider investing in stocks and mutual funds for higher returns. So we typically expect stocks to have a 7 to 10% return over time. Now, you may see some major downturns and some major highs and lows, but over time we expect it to be 7 to 10% return. But when you put money into the stock market, you need to have money that you could lose. Don't put all your money in there that you're going to pay your rent with or that you need to buy groceries with. Excuse me. Instead, you need to set money aside that you can lose if you had to, and that's the money you put in these higher risk investments. So anytime that we make choices about investments, we have to consider the safety versus the risk. So how long until you retire is something you have to think about. If you're going to retire in the next few years, you want to have that money safe. You do not want to risk it going down. If you have 30 years until retirement or 20 years or whatever, then you have plenty of time for that money to go up and down and up and down and hopefully overall have a huge return. If you have a lot of dependents, so maybe children or maybe loved ones that are living with you that depend on you, then you probably want to keep more money safe. Where if you're single and don't have anyone depending on you, you can probably have riskier investments. If you have a low income and you have a hard time paying your bills, then you need to keep your money safer than someone who has a lot of extra income. And we also have speculative investments. These are high risk made in hope to earn a large profit fast. This could be somebody's investing $1,000 and they may lose it all in a week or they may double it in a week. It comes down to a real gamble. So a super risky investment would be a speculative investment. If you look at Exhibit 1-2 and 11-2 and 11-3, those really help you to see different safety and risk factors for different stages of life. And also you can look in there and see how you might fall. There's a little quiz you can take at 11-3 to see how your risk level may be, how it may affect your investments. All right, what kind of components do we have when we're talking about risk? There's inflation risk. So inflation risk is the risk that your investment won't even keep up with inflation. So the prices are rising, but your investment did not. If you have your money just sitting in a checking account at the bank, then it is likely not going to keep up with inflation. However, we do need to keep some money in there to pay our monthly bills. But if you have a very large sum in there, you might want to consider investing some of it so that it can grow, hopefully even more than inflation. There's interest rate risk. That's where the value of your investment, whether it's a bond or stock, may decrease as the interest rates for comparable investments increase. That's not really a problem we have right now. Interest rates are super low. But what it's saying is if we put our money in a bond or something and we're earning 2%, or there's 2% growth on that typically, then, and our interest rates we could earn somewhere else at some other investment was 4%, that would be an interest rate risk, that something else is earning more interest than what our investment is. A business failure risk, this would be a lot with like startups, the risk that a business you invested in is not successful. There are some businesses that we feel pretty secure in investing. If we invest in Amazon or Apple, we feel pretty secure in that. If we invest in someone's startup or maybe when people first started investing in Bitcoin and there's other similar things on the market now, there's a definite high business failure risk there. We don't know if that startup or if that investment is going to succeed or it may go under. That's why you have to make sure with that you are investing extra money, not money you need to pay your bills. Then there's market risk. That's the risk that the economy may negatively affect your investment. If you had a lot of money invested in, let's say, movie theaters, then 2020 probably was not a good year for you. The economy negatively affected that investment. Unfortunately, movie theaters, most of them have remained closed since COVID or remain closed for normal viewing of movies. I know they're open for some special events and things, but overall, the economy has really affected, or this pandemic has really affected movie theaters. So that market risk was very high there. All right, in my in-person class, we would do a little scavenger hunt in the book to find these terms, but I'll just tell them to you since we're doing this virtually. So there's three different kinds of investment categories, okay? So there's income investments. These are safer investments that you pretty much know how much income you're going to be receiving from the investments. So those are safer. Then there's growth investments. Growth, we're looking at something riskier. We're really hoping that this investment grows larger and quicker than an income investment would, but there's definite risk involved. And then liquidity could pertain to either of these. That's how quickly you can turn your money, your investment, back into cash. So if you need to pay your bills with it, then you need to invest in something you can quickly pull back out of there. So liquidity is something we can quickly change to cash to pay our current liabilities. All right, it's very important to reduce some of our investment risk however we can. The first thing we want to do, it's very, very important to do, is asset allocation. Whenever we do our investment project, you'll get to really experience this a lot. This is where you're spreading your assets among several different types of investments to lessen your risk. It's also called diversify. So you don't want to have all your money in GameStop. You don't want to have all your money in Bitcoin. You don't want to have all your money in gold. You want to spread it across different types of investments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. You want to have it in different industries. So maybe we have automotive, we have entertainment, we have pharmaceuticals, and even different companies within those industries. That will help to mitigate your risk so that if one company goes under, then hopefully you can still be safe in another company or another type of investment. So that's asset allocation. I have a link here for bankrate.com, which is a super helpful site for several things, mortgage calculators. Here, this is a calculator that will help you to see from when you retire and what your asset allocation should be. So how much you should put in bonds, how much you should put in stocks and things like that. So you can play around with that if you'd like to research that on bankrate.com. Another way to reduce investment risk is the time factor. The longer you have until you need that money, the less risk there is. If you need that money to be doubled in a month, then there's going to be a lot of risk involved there that you may lose it or that you may not reach that goal. But if you have, like I said, 20 years until retirement, you have time on your side and you can put that money in something riskier, and it may go down some, but we're hoping that ultimately it will grow. So a neat little way you can look at that time factor is take your age, subtract it from 100. That's about how much they suggest to invest in growth. Remember, the riskier accounts. So if you are 30 years old, you subtract 30 from 100, that would be 70. So about 70% of your money you could invest in riskier investments. If you're 60, if you subtract 60 from 100, it'd be 40. So only 40% would be invested in something a little riskier. So that's a neat way to calculate it. All right, your role in the investment process. So do you just put your money in your investments and walk away and then 30 years later say, all right, how much money do I have? No. It's important to evaluate your potential investments ahead of time. First of all, you need to take time to research your investments. So you can consider the return versus how long it would take to make that. Is it worth putting your time into research? So if you're putting $25,000 into an investment, how long does it take you to make $25,000? Maybe takes you almost a year to make that. Well, is that year's worth of income worth investing and spending your time researching? Yes, absolutely. If you're investing $100, maybe you make that in a couple days or 3 days or something like that. So maybe you don't need to spend nearly as much time doing research for that, but definitely consider the size investment you're making needs to correlate somewhat with how much you are researching that investment. So 5 steps to reduce fear and become a smart investor. This is important information to have. First of all, don't start investing before you create an emergency fund. You need to have that safety backup money before you start investing in things. You want to have that money there that is sitting securely in a very safe account first. 3 months worth of living expenses. Like I said, do your homework before investing. Do not be someone who it just allows other people to make the decisions for you. You hear one little, hey, I'm thinking about investing in Pepsi. Okay, I'll do it too. Do your own research, do your homework. Number 3, begin investing with small amounts of money. It's a good idea to take small steps first to make sure that you are secure and you know what you're doing and you use a little bit of trial and error. Number 4, after the purchase, monitor the value of all investments. So even after you invest the money, you purchase stock, whatever it may be, continue to monitor it. You need to see if that stock is doing well or if it's time to take it out, or see if your money in a mutual fund is growing the way that you thought it would, or if it's time to invest in something else. And always continue learning about investing. That will always help you. If you can stay up to date, you don't have to be obsessed with it, but if you can stay up to date with investing, then different things going on in the economy, then it can really help you to make wise choices. 6 ways to safeguard against a financial crisis. All right, so these 6 ways are going to help you. As we know, there have been some major financial crises during the last year, and these are ways that hopefully people safeguarded to help them out throughout this difficult time. So when you see that a crisis is coming, or maybe now still being unsure about what COVID's going to do to the economy, establish a larger than usual emergency fund. So say, you know what, a lot of people lost their jobs and I don't feel stable in my job. I believe I need to put more into an emergency fund, because if I lost it, it could take longer than 3 months for me to find a new job. I have friends who the wife is in nursing school at Greenville Tech, and the husband had a job for 34 years and he got laid off during COVID. And it has been close to a year and he still has not found another job to replace that. So it's so difficult. And I'm so thankful that they had made a lot of these really good decisions to have money set aside and to make smart financial choices so that they're doing okay. Next is know what you owe. Okay, so be aware, like I said, with all those credit cards, if you have a bunch of credit cards, you may have a hard time knowing how much you owe. You may have different debt in different places. Know how much you owe and start working on getting that paid down. Reduce your spending. Okay, if you get in some kind of crisis, whether it's because you lost your job or there's a pandemic or whatever the situation is, reduce your spending. Find ways that you can spend less so that you be able to save extra. Notify your lenders if you're unable to make a payment. Like I said, reach out to those credit card companies and let them know, or whoever your lender is, let them know what you're going through and that you need help. And if you reach out to them, you're a lot less likely to be sued or to have an item repossessed. Say, I want to do what I can, but I can't make the full payments, and they will work with you most likely. Monitor the value of your investment and retirement accounts. So continue to look at those accounts and make sure that those are in the right investments, those are the right decisions. And consider converting investments to cash to preserve value. So in a financial crisis, again, whether that's your own crisis because you lost a job or it's because of something global, you need to consider those investments. Are things getting really risky, really volatile? Should I take my money out of these investments? And the answer may or may not be yes. All right, we're going to get a little bit into bonds here. So bonds are basically issued by either the government or a corporation. It is a debt issuance. So as an investor, you would purchase a bond from either the government or a corporation, and they owe you, they need to pay you back in a specified amount of time. and you can earn interest on those bonds in the meantime. It's a very safe investment most of the time. So government bonds and debt securities, they are a written pledge of a government or municipality to pay a specified sum of money along with interest. So just like I said, so it's like an agreement that you are lending the money right now. They are going to pay you money back, that same money back in the future with interest. So there's several different types: treasury bills, treasury notes, treasury bonds, and treasury inflation protected securities. I'm not going to get into the details of all of those in this lecture, but you can find more details in your book about those. All right, state and local government securities. So one thing is a municipal bond that the state and local government can issue. They're used to fund ongoing activities and major projects of the local government. The cool thing about municipal bonds are the interest that you earn on those are tax-free. We're going to talk about that more in just a minute. Then there's general obligation bonds. These are backed by the full faith, credit, and unlimited taxing power of the government. So in other words, you're trusting that the government is going to pay you back that amount they owe in the end, and they are going to pay you the interest, just because they are trustworthy and because you know they have the ability to collect taxes and to be able to pay you back. Then there's a revenue bond. This money, whenever it's time to repay the investor, it's repaid from the income generated by a project that is designed to finance. So they want to issue these revenue bonds. Maybe they're making a toll road, I don't know, and you expect to get paid back by the revenue that earned. So I told you municipal bonds are tax exempt. So the interest you earn on that municipal bond, you don't have to pay taxes on. But for this reason, interest rates are typically lower on municipal bonds than on taxable bonds. So if you want to figure out what your tax equivalent amount is, so in other words, if you say, okay, well, this municipal bond is going to give me 4% interest, where a typical bond would give me 5% interest, but I'm not having to pay taxes on the municipal bond. What you would do is take your tax-free yield, so that's where you put the 4%, divided by 1 minus your tax rate. Okay, so maybe your average tax rate is 22%. So it'd be 1 minus 22%, so it'd be 78. So this would be 0.04 for 4% divided by 78. That would give you really what kind of tax yield you were making, the tax equivalent yield. And then you can compare it to other bonds to say, is this the best investment? I know it's tax-free, but is that tax-free amount worth taking a lower interest rate? All right, conservative investment options. So we have corporate bonds. Corporate bonds are conservative, meaning safer options. So a corporate bond is a corporation's written pledge to repay that specified amount of money with interest, just like the government bond. So they said, you let us borrow this money. Usually it's $1,000 per bond. That's the face value, the amount that the bondholder is going to receive at maturity, usually $1,000. So the investor says, here, I'm going to let you borrow this $1,000 and you pay it back to me in X amount of years, and then I earn interest in between. So the face value is the amount that is going to be paid back at the maturity date. The maturity date is the date which the corporation is going to repay the borrowed money, anywhere from 1 to 30 years. And then a bond indenture is a legal document that details all of the conditions relating to the bond issue. In other words, it's got all of the legal stuff on there saying, this is exactly when we're paying you back, this is how much we're paying you in interest, this is the face value. It's going to list all of that stuff. That's a bond indenture. 4 different types of bonds. There is a debenture bond. So this is really just backed by the fact that they say they're going to pay you. So there's not anything really specific that's backing it up, but you hopefully trust the company, and that's why you bought the bond. Typically, the interest rate would be a little bit higher for that since it doesn't have anything specifically backing it up. Whereas a mortgage bond is backed up by mortgages. So the fact that they know that people, let's say it's a bank, people are going to pay their mortgages, and then they're going to be able to pay the bonds back, the face value of the bonds back to the investors. So those interest rates are pretty low typically because it is a very safe investment. It has something that's backing it up. A convertible bond is a situation where there's an agreement that you buy these bonds, but if you choose to, you can trade it out for stock in the future. So that's pretty cool. And then there's the high yield bond. A high yield bond, you're going to get a higher interest rate, but there is a higher risk that you will not get that money back at the maturity date because it's a risky bond. Maybe it's backed by auto loans that are issued to very low credit scored purchasers, so those would be risky bonds, but for that reason, they get a higher interest rate. All right, so a few other things about bonds here, provisions for repayment. So how do they get that repayment back? Okay, so you've got the corporation that owes the investor a repayment. So first of all, there's a call feature. If the bond has a call feature, that allows a corporation to call in or buy outstanding bonds from the current bondholders before the maturity date. So if the corporation decides to pay off that debt early and they have a call feature, they can go ahead and buy the bond back before the maturity date whenever they choose. A sinking fund is something that the corporation would have where they make deposits to put that money aside so whenever the bond is at the maturity date, they can buy it back. So a sinking fund is money they're putting aside so in the future they can buy those bonds back. And serial bonds, these are not Lucky Charms. These are serial as in they have a single issue date, but then they mature on different dates. So a portion of it matures maybe 1 year in, then the next portion 2 years in, and the next portion 3 years in, the next one 5 years in. So it's a serial bond. So you gradually get your repayment back. All right, we have a few formulas I want to look at really quick. I want to show you. We have our interest income. So that is normally paid on corporate bonds every 6 months. Okay, so typically bonds are paid, the interest is paid every 6 months. So the way you figure this out, to figure out the amount of annual interest, you take the face value, which is typically $1,000, times the interest rate. And if it's paid every 6 months, you're going to have to divide that by 2. Okay, so the interest rate is for the year. That's the amount of annual interest. Okay, so annual would be if it was paid once, but if it's paid every 6 months, you divide that amount by 2. Okay, so the dollar appreciation of a bond value, that's the value of a bond. The value of a bond fluctuates depending on the economy. So if the interest of the bond is higher than the economy, the typical market interest, and then later the interest in the market begins to grow, you might say, okay, well, now my bond is not worth as much, or vice versa. Let's say your bond is making 4% and the economy interest was also 4%, the market interest, and then the market interest goes down to 3%, that would mean that your bond appreciated in value. It went up. So you can always sell your bond to other investors. To figure out the approximate market value, you take the dollar amount of annual interest, which we just calculated in the prior slide, divided by comparable interest rate. That would tell you how much it would be worth in the market, maybe more or less than the face value, and then you can decide whether or not you want to sell the bond. All right, so bonds are sold at a percentage of their face value. So typically the face value is $1,000. The current price would be the bond price quotation times the face value. So maybe this bond is selling at 98%. That would be 0.98 times the face value of 1,000. So the bond would actually be sold for $980. Why would it be sold for less than the face value? That would be because they were offering less interest than the market rate. Or maybe it's sold for more. Maybe it's sold for 103%. So you take 1.03 times the $1,000 face value. That would mean that you have to pay extra in order to buy this bond because maybe the interest rate is higher than the market rate. So that's how you figure out the current price. And then the current yield calculations. Basically what we're trying to see here is what is the percentage that you're getting, like the interest percent you're getting basically. So you take the annual interest amount divided by the current price, that's going to give you the current yield. How much is that bond actually giving you on an annual basis? All right, that's all I've got for you guys today. Please reach out with questions, and I hope that you have learned a lot about the basics of investing and bonds.